Teenage bullies think farm girl is easy target, but don't know she's actually Delta Force trained. A story by Heartfelt Tales. The morning silence of Maple Ridge Farm shattered like glass as four teenagers in matching Letterman jackets kicked down the weathered gate, their laughter echoing across the peaceful countryside. Sarah Mitchell paused mid-swing with her hoe, dirt still clinging to her weathered boots, and watched as the boys strutted onto her property like they owned it. What they didn't know was that the quiet woman in overalls standing before them had once been Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, Delta Force operative, trained to eliminate threats in the world's most dangerous places. Sarah had returned to her grandmother's farm 18 months ago, trading her combat boots for work boots, her rifle for farming tools, seeking the peace that had eluded her through 3 tours in Afghanistan. The transition hadn't been easy. Some nights, she still woke to the phantom sound of helicopters, her hand instinctively reaching for weapons that were no longer there. But the rhythm of farm life, the predictable cycles of planting and harvest, the gentle lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through corn stalks, had slowly begun to heal wounds that ran deeper than scars. The farm had been her sanctuary, her chance to prove to herself that she could nurture life instead of taking it. She'd spent countless hours restoring the old barn, replanting the vegetable gardens, and caring for the rescued animals that had found their way to her land. It was honest work that made her feel human again, connected to something larger than the violence she'd left behind. But now, as she watched these 4 boys, couldn't be more than 17 or 18, advance toward her with malicious grins, she felt that familiar alertness creeping back into her muscles, the hypervigilance she'd worked so hard to suppress. Well, what do we have here?" called out the apparent leader, a stocky kid with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confident smirk that came from never facing real consequences. His jacket bore the name Jackson across the back. "Boys, looks like we found ourselves a little farm girl playing in the dirt." His companions, a lanky redhead, a shorter boy with dark hair, and another blonde who looked like Jackson's younger brother, spread out behind him, blocking her path back to the farmhouse. Sarah recognized the formation immediately. They'd done this before, knew how to corner their targets, how to intimidate through positioning and numbers. "This is private property," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. "You need to leave." Jackson laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Or what? You'll call your daddy?" He looked around theatrically. "Oh wait, I heard your whole family's gone." Just little Sarah all alone on the big scary farm. They'd done their homework, Sarah realized. This wasn't random. These boys had specifically targeted her, probably hearing in town that she was isolated, vulnerable. What they saw was a woman alone, easy prey. What they couldn't see were the calluses on her hands from years of military training, the carefully controlled breathing that came from meditation techniques learned in combat zones, the way her eyes automatically cataloged exit routes and potential weapons. "We're gonna have some fun today," the redhead chimed in, pulling out his phone. "Maybe take some videos. Show everyone in town what happens to weirdos who don't know their place." Sarah's jaw tightened. In her previous life, threats like this would have been met with swift, decisive action. But she wasn't Sergeant Mitchell anymore. She was trying to be just Sarah, trying to prove she could solve problems without violence, trying to build instead of destroy. "Look," she said, taking a small step backward, hands raised peacefully. "I don't want any trouble. There's nothing here worth bothering with. Why don't you boys just—" "Why don't you shut up?" Jackson snarled, emboldened by what he interpreted as fear. He grabbed the hoe from her hands and tossed it aside. "You think you're better than everyone else, hiding out here like some kind of hermit? My dad owns half this county, and I'm tired of looking at this dump every time we drive by." The pieces clicked into place. Jackson's father was probably William Jackson, the real estate developer who'd been trying to buy up farmland in the area for a new shopping complex. Sarah's refusal to sell had likely been a thorn in his side, and now his son was here to apply a different kind of pressure. "Time to teach you a lesson about respect," the dark-haired boy said, cracking his knuckles. Sarah's training screamed at her to act. She could disable all 4 of them in under 30 seconds, had done far worse to far more dangerous opponents. But she'd made a promise to herself when she'd hung up her uniform: no more violence, no matter what. She was going to find another way. "Please," she said, deliberately making her voice smaller, more frightened. I'll think about selling. Just don't hurt me." The boys exchanged glances, their confidence swelling. This was going exactly as they'd planned. Jackson stepped closer, close enough that Sarah could smell the energy drink on his breath, see the cruel satisfaction in his eyes. "Too late for that," he said. "Should have thought about that before you embarrassed my family." That's when Sarah heard it, a small whimper from behind the barn. Her blood ran cold as she realized one of her rescue dogs, Murphy, a 3-legged German shepherd who'd been found half dead on the side of a highway, had wandered into the yard. Murphy was gentle as a lamb, traumatized from his previous abuse, and the sight of aggressive strangers would terrify him. "Well, look at that," the younger Jackson brother said, noticing the dog too. "Think it's time to put that mutt out of its misery." Something snapped inside Sarah. She'd tried the peaceful route. She'd tried to de-escalate. But there were lines that couldn't be crossed, and threatening an innocent animal who'd already suffered enough was one of them. "Step away from the dog," she said, her voice completely different now, calm, controlled, carrying an undertone of absolute authority that made all 4 boys freeze. Jackson laughed, but it sounded forced. "What are you going to do about it?" Sarah straightened slowly, and suddenly she wasn't hunched over trying to appear harmless. Her posture shifted into something predatory, balanced, ready. Years of military bearing reasserted themselves in an instant. "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away," she said. "Take it." The redhead moved first, lunging toward Murphy with obvious intent to harm. Sarah's body reacted before her mind could second-guess itself. 3 quick steps put her between the boy and the dog. Her hand shot out, catching his wrist in a grip that made him yelp in pain and dropped him to his knees. "What the?" Jackson started forward, but Sarah was already moving. The next 30 seconds unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance that Sarah had performed countless times in training and combat. The dark-haired boy swung wildly at her head. She ducked smoothly under his arm and swept his legs, sending him crashing into the dirt. The younger Jackson brother tried to tackle her from behind, but she sidestepped and used his momentum to send him tumbling into a pile of hay bales. Jackson himself, seeing his friends neutralized so quickly, pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the cops. You assaulted us." Sarah was standing perfectly still now, not even breathing hard, her 3 attackers groaning in the dirt around her. The transformation was complete. Gone was the timid farm girl, replaced by someone who radiated competence and controlled danger. "Go ahead," she said calmly. "Call them. Tell them how 4 teenage boys trespassed on private property, threatened a woman living alone, and attempted to harm a disabled rescue animal. I'm sure that'll go over well with your father's political ambitions." Jackson's hand trembled slightly as he held the phone. For the first time, doubt crept into his expression. "While you're making that call," Sarah continued, walking slowly toward him, "you might want to mention that Sarah Mitchell isn't just a farm girl. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, 3rd Special Forces Group, Delta Force. 3 tours, multiple commendations. I've taken down terrorist cells and survived firefights that would give you nightmares. But you know what the hardest thing was?" She stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed nervously. "Learning to live with peace instead of violence. Learning to grow things instead of destroying them. Learning to show mercy to people who probably don't deserve it." The other boys were picking themselves up now, mud and hay clinging to their expensive clothes, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said, her voice carrying the same authority she'd once used to command soldiers in life-or-death situations. "You're going to turn around and walk off my property. You're going to tell your father that this farm isn't for sale at any price, and that any further harassment will be met with appropriate consequences. And you're going to remember that there are people in this world who choose to be gentle not because they're weak, but because they're strong enough to show restraint. She picked up her hoe, hefting it casually but meaningfully. Most importantly, you're going to learn that true strength isn't about intimidating those you think are weaker than you. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. It's about building instead of tearing down. It's about choosing to do what's right even when no one's watching. Jackson's phone slipped from his nerveless fingers. The four boys backed away slowly, their entire worldview shaken by this encounter with someone who'd shown them the difference between actual strength and the bullying they'd mistaken for power. We didn't know. The redhead stammered. No, you didn't, Sarah agreed. But ignorance isn't an excuse for cruelty. You made choices today. Make better ones tomorrow. As the boys retreated through the broken gate, Sarah knelt down beside Murphy, who had pressed himself against her leg, seeking comfort. She scratched behind his ears, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. It's okay, boy, she murmured. They're gone. But even as she comforted the dog, Sarah grappled with the contradiction she'd just lived. She'd sworn off violence, had come to this farm seeking peace and a chance to heal from the warrior she'd been. Yet when pushed to the breaking point, when innocent lives were threatened, that warrior had emerged again without hesitation. Maybe that was the real lesson, she thought. Peace wasn't about being weak or passive. True peace came from being strong enough to protect what mattered, wise enough to show restraint when possible, and courageous enough to act when necessary. Over the following weeks, word spread through the small farming community about what had happened at the Mitchell farm. But the story that circulated wasn't about a violent confrontation. Instead, people talked about how Sarah had shown remarkable restraint, how she'd protected a helpless animal, how she'd turned potential enemies into chastened young men who might think twice before bullying anyone again. The Jackson boys never returned, and the harassment stopped completely. But more than that, something had shifted in the community. People began dropping by the farm, ostensibly to buy fresh vegetables or eggs, but really to check on Sarah, to offer friendship and support. Mrs. Chen from the next farm over brought homemade soup and stayed for coffee. Tom Bradley, whose property bordered Sarah's on the north side, offered to help repair the gate the boys had damaged. Even some of the teenagers from town, having heard the story, began volunteering to help with the harvest, drawn perhaps by the example of someone who'd shown them what real strength looked like. Sarah found herself building the community connections she'd never realized she'd been missing. Her farm became a place where people gathered, where the wounded found healing, where young people learned that true courage meant standing up for others, not tearing them down. 6 months later, as Sarah watched a group of local teenagers, including 2 of the boys who tried to bully her, helping to build a new shelter for her rescue animals, she understood something profound about her journey. She hadn't abandoned her identity as a warrior when she'd left the military. She'd simply learned to be a different kind of warrior, one who fought for peace, who used strength to protect rather than to harm, who understood that the most important battles were often won not through violence, but through compassion, courage, and the willingness to stand up for what's right. The farm had indeed become her sanctuary, but not just a place to hide from the world. It had become a beacon of what was possible when strength was tempered with wisdom, when courage was guided by compassion, and when someone who'd seen the worst of humanity chose to believe in and nurture the best. And in the quiet moments, when Murphy lay contentedly at her feet and the sound of laughter drifted across the fields from the young people working together in her barn, Sarah knew she'd found something worth fighting for. A future where strength protected rather than intimidated, where difference was celebrated rather than attacked, and where even former enemies could become allies in building something better.